Just want to welcome everybody to our webinar and thank you guys for joining us today. I'm Emma, I'm the marketing specialist here at Panos. So today I'm going to be kind of acting as the moderator, and today we're going to be chatting a little bit about some general marketing terms, kind of taking things back to the basics here as a refresher on some concepts. And today, as our panelists, we have Abby Fitzgerald and Kailyn Gallagher-LaRoche, who are media managers. And I will hand it off to you guys and kind of get things started.
Thanks, Emma. So, as Emma mentioned, we are doing a webinar series for Back to the Basics, focusing on all things media and really taking it down to a 101 level. So, first things first, why is it so important to be using the correct terminology?
Incredible question. There are so many reasons why we want to make sure that across the board, everyone is using the same, not only the same terminology, but understanding what that truly means. And some of the reasoning could be for clearer communication with internal staff or your marketing agency, or for efficient collaboration, making sure everybody across the board is on the same page. But ultimately, the purpose of this is to lead to a better marketing outcome and ideally business growth, if you're using the right terminology to describe the exact purpose and exact situation that you're in to move you forward in order to optimize.
That's absolutely right. And there are so many different terms and so much jargon that is specific to media. So we're going to go through a bunch of definitions to make sure everyone's on the same page. And if you have any questions as we're going through this, or if there's another term that you're wondering about, feel free to pop it in the questions and Emma will let us know and we'll make sure to touch on it. But the first one, starting really at the most basic, is impressions. And this is the number of times that your ad was shown. So the number of times that it was seen. This doesn't necessarily equate to, total users, but how many times it was seen.
And that really is mainly one of the most difficult parts of an impression to grasp, is the fact that it's not just who has seen your ad, but it's how many times your ad was actually served. Your ad can be served on a page multiple times, depending on what type of approach you're doing, what type of ad platform you're serving on, the ad type you're serving with. So understanding that impressions might not exactly mean how many people saw your ad, but more focused on how many times your ad was actually served within whatever that ad space was. Next, kind of moving us down that funnel, is clicks. So a click is just the total number of times a user actually clicked on your ad.
Yeah, absolutely. And this can be, depending on where your ad is being served, it can be a couple different kinds of clicks. So it could be, if it's a display ad, whatever the CTA is, if it's, apply now, learn more, it could be clicking on that button. If it's a social ad, it could be someone interacting, even if it's, giving a thumbs up or, hearting the ad. Or if it's a search ad, sometimes there's those different site links and other components, and clicking on those, that all counts towards your total click count that shows up as your metrics.
And the next stage of the funnel that it's really critical to understand not only the purpose of this, but the formula, is click-through rates. So understanding what your impressions are, how many times your ad was served, versus how many times a user, whether it's a customer or a potential customer, actually interacted with that ad and clicked on it. So the ratio of impressions to clicks is how we're going to get our click-through rate. So the actual formula is clicks divided by impressions times 100. That times 100 is actually really critical within this formula, or else you're just going to get a really kind of boring looking decimal. Once you multiply it by 100, you're going to get into the percentages to really understand what was that ratio of when my ad was served versus the interest that customers may have had with that ad.
And so these are really your frontline metrics. So before, before someone has those interactions and interacting with the ad, and then what happens once they get to your website, to your landing page. So those, we would have your conversions. And so the conversions is the most desired action on that page that you want people to take that is measurable. So typically, this is the lowest part in the funnel where you can measure someone. So in an ideal situation, it might be, someone, makes it all the way through an application. If you can track that far, that's fantastic. A lot of the times you can't. And so it may be someone just clicking on that button that's showing intent to start.
And there's so many different types of intent to start or bottom of the funnel activity that we can track. As an FI, it's a lot more difficult to focus on that final destination aspect of the conversion funnel or of the sales funnel because of all of the different applications needed in order to open an account or apply for a loan. There's a lot more steps than what a e-commerce website might have, where you see a product, you add it to the cart, you buy it. Perfect, super, and simple. Where for FIs, your conversion actions might be an apply now on your landing page. That's as far as marketing can bring people into that sales funnel. But maybe you don't have an application provider. So you could do a form fill instead if you have fillable forms on your page. That form submit button, that's moving them as close to the funnel as you can get them to lead them to the sales direction. It could also be maybe you don't have any of these options. You don't have an application provider, you don't have a form. Maybe it's setting up an appointment or calling to learn more. There's many different stages that a conversion could be at. Granted, we would love if everything was apply now or the end of the submission button in an application. That's a beautiful situation. For the most part, it's just going to be that critical action on your landing page. That should be your conversion. And before we move to the next one, I just want to make a minor note. Conversions are different from a campaign and ad perspective versus what Google Analytics considers a conversion.
Yep.
That's now called a key event. That's a completely different conversation. However, I just wanted to make sure that that is noted. A campaign conversion versus a website GA4 conversion, separate entities.
Yeah, that's a great call out. The next thing that we want to talk about is cost per click, or CPC, depending on what platform you're looking at. Sometimes they just use the abbreviation. And so this is how much you paid for each click that happened during your campaign. The math for this, it is your cost per click equals your total campaign spend divided by the number of total clicks that you received. So nothing too crazy there in terms of math. You know, if you have a campaign that spent $500 and you get 1,000 clicks, then your cost per click is 50 cents. So or $500 divided by 1,000, that's how you get that. The one really important thing to call out here is that this is a metric associated with your campaign. It is a performance metric versus a payment type, which Abby will get into.
Yes. So an additional payment type that this is a term that gets used in many scenarios where it maybe shouldn't be used, and that is pay per click, or PPC. So pay per click, PPC, is a digital advertising model where advertisers pay a fee each time your ad is clicked. So this is a very specific payment model. You don't have your set spend and say, run it. You say, this is what I want to be able to bid per click or pay per click. And this is mainly seen only with search or text related ads. Basically, every other ad type for display, programmatic, social, you are not billing on a pay per click scenario. You're oftentimes billing in the next category that we're going to dive into. But the most critical thing to know here is pay per click and cost per click are not the same thing by any means. Exactly like Kailyn said, the cost per click, or CPC, is a metric. So is your campaign performing cost efficiently versus how are you paying for the campaign? So it's really important that we're not cross-pollinating those terms and that they stay as their own individual entities.
Yeah, absolutely. And pay per click, if you were buying from, a third party and that's what the payment model was going to be, you would be able to say, okay, for $500, I want to, I will get so many clicks. And you would be able to know what volume of clicks you should expect for your campaign, where cost per click is, again, just based off of how a campaign performed. So on the opposite side of that, we have cost per thousand, or CPM. You wouldn't think it would be CPM. You would think it would be CPT, T for thousand, M, it's milli, which is Latin for 1,000. So nice and complicated, but that is pay per thousand, which is per thousand impressions that you receive. So say it's a $6 CPM. If you get 3,000 impressions, you're spending $18. So that's what most of the ad platforms bill off of.
And the extra confusing layer of this specific term is not only does that M stand for thousand, not million, but this is a payment type and a metric. So where cost per click was just a metric and pay per click was just a payment type, cost per thousand, CPM, kind of both, just to make things really confusing. But the way that you're going to calculate your cost per thousand is taking your overall cost, what did you pay for that ad set within a very specific period of time, and then taking that divided by your impressions divided by 1,000, a gross formula. Within that sheet that we had shared with everyone who has registered, there is a full PDF on all of these terms that we're going over, as well as the formulas. So you don't have to remember the mumbo jumbo we're saying on how to do a formula. But basically, it's taking your impressions, dividing those by 1,000, and then dividing that by your cost to really better understand not only how are we performing, meeting a group of ideally 1,000 impressions, what is your cost associated, but it also gives you an understanding of what am I paying in total and how am I performing from a payment perspective.
Yep, absolutely. And it looks like we got a question that just came in.
We do, yeah. So David Creeman here, he's asking, so I'm aggregating my CPC and my PPC together to calculate an accurate ROI for a campaign. And that was his question. Would you guys say that's accurate or have anything else to add?
No, if you want to look at your ROI, you would just be looking at your cost per click, which would, in theory, your cost per click and your PPC they should be the same number in terms of if it's a search campaign, because everything else would be built on a CPM model. But if you're trying to calculate your ROI, you would want to be focusing on your cost per click.
You might be getting slightly skewed information if you're trying to get a ratio of the two,
Yeah.
and then comparing that to your overall, like what you got in return from the campaigns. It's better to just look at a holistic, what did you spend in general compared to what did you make from that, whatever marketing scenario you had. That way you have the direct comparison of this is what I spent and this was my return versus this is what I spent per individual interaction or per individual, I guess interaction would really be the only option to use there. So it would just give you a little bit of a better understanding of what was the return of all of the investments that you're doing and the return on your ad spend, to just do it based off of what you spent versus what you got in return.
Great, thank you guys. We do have another question here about having a resource or takeaway piece with all this content. That should be in the email that you received with the link to join today's webinar. However, if you would like it in another format, please feel free to reach out to me directly, econlin@panosmarketing.com. And again, I'd be happy to send that over to you.
Great, so moving along, next one, search engine marketing or SEM. So this is a particular ad type, an ad placement that shows up on your search engine results page. So say you're in Google, you're looking for a coffee shop near me, and you have all of the listings that show up. They are largely text-based, and they look like native listings oftentimes. So you have headlines sometimes too, and then some different descriptions. Depending on whether it's a desktop or mobile ad that you're seeing, you may see some additional site links or some like locations that show up or phone numbers, different items that you can interact with. Now we are seeing that platforms like Google in particular are starting to add in additional elements where you may see the bank's or the business's logo show up. There may also be an image that shows up depending on what device you are looking at these on. Typically with a SEM campaign on your search engine results page, there are up to 7 paid spaces, usually 4 at the top and 3 at the bottom of the page. Depending on what the topic and keyword is that is being searched for, sometimes only the top 4 will show up, but there can be up to 7 on a page.
And within that document that Emma had just mentioned that you guys will see, almost all of the information we're talking about today is on that document, except for the one that I'm going to talk about right now, because it's mainly just we have to cover our bases here. What Kailyn just went over is search engine marketing, SEM. SEM is incredibly and wildly different than SEO. Those are 2 completely different entities. SEO, search engine optimization, is the practice of orienting your website or your content to rank higher on the search engine result page to suit the needs of a user. So that ideally you receive more traffic. You're trying to boost your overall visibility to meet a customer's need. And algorithms understand what is someone searching and how are you the right option for them, and will most likely rank you higher. However, this is an organic tactic. There's no money behind or paid campaign budget behind SEO. This is solely your organic traffic, how your website exists as an organic entity. And overall, like Kailyn said, there's about 4 to 7-ish listings on a search engine result page, for a paid campaign. For organic, there's about 10 listings per page. So while yes, they do live within the same space, they live on that search engine result page, they have very, very different purposes. And I think the biggest thing to take away is that SEO and SEM should not, under any circumstance, be used interchangeably. They are not the same thing. So if you're looking to boost your overall online visibility, you most definitely can use and should use paid campaign tactics to build that awareness. But you also need to be building your SEO awareness and building your authoritativeness within the search engine space. So they are not one tactic that you can just lump into each other and say, yep, I'm boosting my visibility. You have to treat them as two very separate entities with two very, very separate approaches on how to boost that visibility.
Yeah, that's a great thing to call out. And I will think one of the questions that we often see come through from either existing clients or new prospects that we're looking, that we're talking with, is they ask for help with their paid SEO listings. All right. So, it could mean a couple of different things. And so to make sure that your marketing partners, whether it's an agency or your internal department, to make sure that they are able to deliver exactly what it is that you're hoping to achieve, using the right terminology is gonna be a big help.
It's a good place to start.
Absolutely. All right. So now going into the engagement rate. So this is how actively users are engaging with your content. So this may be a term that depending on where you're looking at it on the platform, it may be calculated differently. So right up there with the payment terms, it gets a little bit confusing. Some of them, social will calculate it differently than on website, than, unpaid.
Yeah, so to understand how each platform, exactly like Kailyn said, every individual platform that you're running on may have a different formula, but it all falls underneath a very similar umbrella. So for social media, an engagement rate is going to be your total interactions divided by your total impressions, and then again times 100 so we can get a nice percentage. The important thing to know for social media is the total interactions bucket. That is post likes, post shares, post comments, any type of interaction with that individual post compared to how many people saw it. What were the overall impressions? How many times was that post served within the organic and or paid space? Kind of a general rule of thumb for social media engagement, while this seems very low, an ideal engagement rate for a social platform is going to be anywhere between 1% to 5%. Feels very low, but think about the overall visibility and awareness that you're able to get with social media. There's going to be a pretty intense difference in that ratio of impressions versus overall total interaction. Whereas on the website side, the website analytics, this is similarly the percentage of sessions that are considered engaged. But the way that they're considered engaged is very different than most platforms. So your engagement rate for website analytics is going to be calculated by, did a session last for more than 10 seconds? Did this session see 2 or more page views? Did a user travel around your website? Or did they trigger a conversion event, which, as I mentioned earlier, different from your campaign conversions, it's your analytics conversion. If a user did any of these things, that's going to boost your overall website related engagement rate.
And then for the paid side of things, that's really just going to be your click-through rate. So as we mentioned before, that ratio of clicks divided by overall impressions will show you how engaged users were. So then moving right along into the engagement rate or the bounce rate, this is really the opposite of your engagement rate. This is particularly from website analytics, and this is the percent of sessions that users were not engaged, meaning that they didn't last longer than 10 seconds or complete a conversion event or view at least 2 pages. So typically, if you're trying to figure out the math for your bounce rate, it's going to be a percent, and it's 1 minus your engagement rate.
That 1 is really critical in there because you are subtracting from a percentage. You have to have that 1 in there to get an accurate representation of your bounce rate, but exactly like Kailyn said, they are just the opposite of each other. And there's something that I mentioned during the engagement rate section for sessions. Sessions are just a treasure to understand, and the concept of them has adjusted slightly over the past few years. However, overall, the session on your website is the period of time in which a user is interacting with your website, and that session will end after 30 minutes of inactivity. So if I go to your website and I'm typing around, I'm going to a couple pages, this is an engaged session, and then I walk away from my computer for 30 minutes, and then I come back 35 minutes later, I refresh the page, that's a second session. Even though it could be the same browser, could be the same tab, I wasn't inactive for at least 30 minutes, so my session had to restart. This is why you sometimes see multiple sessions come from the same user. No user, it's not common that a user is ready to purchase or buy or move forward within that buying journey immediately. Sometimes they need a couple more touch points. Sometimes they need a little bit more information to make the right decision. So they're going to have to come back and learn more or re-review whatever they were looking at. But overall, it's understanding how many times did someone have to come to my website in order to move forward with an action. But that 30-minute window of inactivity is really critical to understand. That's kind of seen across the board for website analytics. Sessions are usually around a 30-minute window of inactivity, which also means that if I'm on your website for 3 hours and I do not stop, and I keep poking around and I open new tabs, and maybe I'm not even on your website anymore, but I'm still using that same browser, that's holding on to my cookie information and it's caching that information. So that is still one session. It's a little convoluted there, a little vague on how that is working. And that's just, it's a metric that has been around, like I mentioned, but Google has really taken a spin on how they want these sessions to be calculated. So definitely pay attention to overall, how many users do you have entering your site versus how many sessions did they have? Are they coming back to do more or to move down that funnel?
Absolutely. So I know we are coming up on time. We got 3 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, anything that you would like us to touch on.
While waiting for anything to funnel through, overall, the purpose of this is truly to know these terms inside and out. And by doing that, it will really help you properly interpret not only the results of your campaign, but help you understand how can you optimize and refine your strategies in the future. Knowing not only what these terms mean, how they function, but how are they formulated? What goes into the formulas to understand the value of the metrics or the payment types or the ad types, all of these different terms that we could go over. Truly understanding them inside and out will help you have much stronger conversations internally and externally.
And as we mentioned at the beginning, this is going to be a webinar series. So if there are any topics in particular that you would like to see us cover or questions that you have, send them on over and we'll make sure to get them included.
Great. Well, if there's no more questions, I just want to thank you guys for joining us, both to the panelists and the attendees today. Again, if you guys have any questions, please feel free to reach out to myself, Abby, or Kailyn. Again, we would love to do a few more of these, make it a series, focus on any particular terms or concepts that you guys, might be looking for a little bit more clarification on. So thank you guys again, and we hope to see you next time.